Red Sister by Mark Lawrence, the first book of the Ancestor series, which is a series that I've always wanted to read, but I don't know much about it. It turns out that it's a combination between Assassin's Creed, Harry Potter, with a little bit Scooby-Doo sprinkled on top of this odd-shaped sundae. Now, with a description like that, the first question that should come to mind is this actually good? Is this metaphorical sundae edible? Well, we will talk about that. Let's talk about the story first. In Red Sister, we follow Nona, a child whose mother sells her off to this guy who buys children, apparently a lucrative profession in this world, and this guy sells them to convents, academies, or whoever wants them. Through a series of events, Nona is sold off to this guy that is going to train her to become a pit fighter. And that means that they are kind of like gladiators, only they use their fists instead of swords. However, everything changes when one day Nona murders the champion of the pit because he is hurting one of her only friends. This leads to Nona being arrested, and she's about to be hanged when she is saved by a nun of the Coven of Sweet Mercy. This is a group of nuns that, of course, praise the god, and also train their whole life to become a mix between assassins and warriors. Now, this nun offers to take Nona to the convent, where if she accepts to become an apprentice, all her crimes will be forgiven. And Nona, of course, agrees, mainly because she doesn't want to be hanged, and because she doesn't have anywhere else to go. The rest of the story focuses on Nona's life in the convent, trying to get along with her classmates, discovering what other classes do they have, and trying to survive their training. As far as the positives go, I would say that the story feels like it progresses naturally, and it feels that things are happening. It also has some nice twists and turns here and there that keep it from feeling stale. But with that said, I still think there's some negatives for this story. The first one being that the story feels like it's trying to be a lot of things at the same time. It tries to be this sort of school days adventure, and then it becomes this sort of political drama, and then it becomes this Scooby-Doo light adventures, and then we move on to becoming this gritty and gory assassin story. And while it didn't bother me as much as I thought, because I thought the bouncing between concepts actually felt well balanced, because it never really truly comes out of nowhere. We always get some foreshadowing, and when we do change of concept, it actually commits fully to this concept. It's not something half-assed or that they're trying something. It actually goes full into the concept of this plot. However, I do see how some people may find this bothersome, especially because it feels like the story is sort of indecisive in what it's trying to be. The other thing that bothered me about the story is the ending. Well, technically the second ending, because you see, throughout the whole novel we have two timelines. The first one, and is the main focus of the novel, is the present timeline where we see Nona training to become a nun. But then we have a few chapters that are flash forwards. It's a timeline in the future that gives us an understanding of what happened to some of the characters in the future. The thing is that the present timeline actually ends up in a good note. It gives us the ending of a good character arc and the natural progression of events that take place in the plot. However, it then gives us an extra chapter, like an epilogue that takes place in the future. And it tries to be this great, impressive hook for the next novel, but it really feels like a dot. Nothing feels as impressive or fascinating for the story. And it also tries to be this bridge that connects the timeline of the present and the future. But the exposition it gives us, it feels clunky and out of place and makes this whole chapter feel very mediocre. And it would be fun if it was in any other place in the novel, but no, this is the last chapter, the last bite of this novel, and it ends up in a very lackluster note. Now, moving on to the characters, I only have positive things to say about this one. Nona, our protagonist, feels like a well thought out and deep character. She has a personality, she has needs, desire, faults, and especially secrets. And the same thing could be said about the supporting characters. Well, the main core group, because we also got some supporting characters, but they're not mentioned all that much and they don't really get an arc, but I mean the core group of characters that we follow, they all have character arcs and personalities. Some fight to find their own strength, others to be humbled, and others to accept what they are. But by the end, it feels like they're all very dynamic people whose alliances and even beliefs change throughout time. Enemies become friends, friends become enemies, just as it happens in real life. The next thing I want to touch on is the writing, which is very good. Mr. Lawrence has a very sharp pen, and his prose comes out as very poetic and witty at the same time. It feels like each sentence was carefully constructed and placed to make the most out of the words in it, and he truly knows how to make vague reveals. I don't want to give spoilers, but I'll just leave it at that. The only problem I have in this regard is this strange tendency that the novel has to be in the middle of this very action-filled scene, and then boom, we come to a screeching halt and it starts delivering us lore and world-building information. And it's not that this information we're getting is not fascinating or interesting, it actually is necessary to understand some of the action that's about to take place, but did it have to be delivered in the middle of the action? Because it kills the whole momentum of the scene, and it actually takes you out of the action when we suddenly have to learn about this little detail that we didn't tell you about before, and that it's gonna play a big role in this scene. So yeah, it happens a couple of times, and enough that it really threw me out of the scene, and I was like, right. And when we go back to the action scene, it's like, right, we were doing this, like, I understand why it has to be delivered, but couldn't it have been delivered before this all happened? Now, in terms of lore and world building, I would say this novel is actually good and complete in that regard. It gives us an interesting world that is constantly sprinkled with myth, history, and legends that make it feel like this has been a civilization standing for thousands of years. And even the most unique fantasy elements it presents, it feels well thought out that it bleeds into everyday life. For example, in this world there's different types of blood that come from the ancestors. Depending on which kind of blood you have, it gives you a different ability. There's a kind of blood that makes you faster, hence more useful in combat, and there's another type of blood that makes you more adept to this world's version of magic. So yeah, people not only judge you on what kind of money you have, on what is your social standing, but also on what kind of blood you have in your veins. And it is a concept that we constantly see in everyday life. It appears in conversation, it appears on how people judge you and your abilities, and even how the nuns choose their apprentices. But overall, I would say Red Sister is a solid novel. It has some good ideas and for the most part a good story. I will give it 4 stars out of 5. And while it has an interesting lore and world building, the story has some problems, especially the ending that really sets it back from being a masterpiece. So if you're looking to read something along the lines of Assassin's Creed set in a school, I would highly suggest this book. While it is not a masterpiece, it is a novel solid enough that it created interest in the whole series, and I cannot wait to read the second book in the series, Grey Sister. And that was the review. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel if you want more content about books, manga, and graphic novel series. Other than that, my name is Aaron, and I'll be seeing you all.